We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Greetings everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Supervillains Explored, where today I'm going to do something a little different. In pretty much all my other videos where I usually talk about one character and one character only, this time I'm changing it up a little bit. And I'm not just talking about one character, but an entire race of them. Today I'm going to be talking about one of the greatest, most dangerous, and most malevolent alien races ever to inhabit the Marvel Universe, the Brood, who first appeared in Uncanny X-Men number 155 in 1982. Now, most people remember the Brood as being like a race of insectoid-like aliens that the X-Men and most other spacefaring Marvel heroes have fought off against. But the actual origins of the Brood are completely unknown. All we know about them is that before they became a big enemy of the X-Men and most other cosmic superheroes that lived in the Marvel Universe, the Brood actually started appearing in swarms in the Shi'ar galaxy, and they posed a massive threat to the peaceful Shi'ar Empire. Despite being very savage and very animalistic, the Brood actually share like a central coven intelligence among their ranks. So much so that, despite the fact that they have no real useful appendages to which they can use to create technology, instead they actually predate on a large number of space-centered animals and creatures, such as space whales and star sharks, who are only native to the Shi'ar galaxy. And what they do is that they leech on to these animals, and they basically burrow and dig holes inside their bodies, and they create large, massive habitats and homes to live in these animals, sort of like parasites, if you will. The only downside is that once these animals that they live inside actually die, they have to go and do the same thing to a new animal. However, there was one instance where they found an Acanthi, which is a gigantic continent-sized space whale, and this Acanthi was actually much, much, much larger than the usual Acanthi that they would inhabit. This Acanthi was like the size of this Acanthi was like the size of freaking Africa. It was so big. So the Brood decided to use this creature as their main base of operations. However, when this creature died and landed on an unknown planet, the Brood sort of changed up their strategies, and they decided, hey, let's make this our home city from now on. But unfortunately, they couldn't really do that because the indigenous predators of said planet would try to scavenge and feed off the corpse of the giant space whale, which took literally centuries for the corpse to even decompose because it was so damn huge. I guess I guess you could possibly call that the origin of the Brood. It's never really been explained where the Brood actually came from, or who created them, or how they evolved, but that's pretty much how they were sort of introduced. Now, one of the more interesting things about the Brood are their social hierarchy and their organization, as well as their biology and their methods of reproduction. Like most other insectoid colonies, the Brood live in a large community. There are many different communities of the Brood, and they're all ruled by a queen, who is obviously the most intelligent out of that whole community, and who also has telepathic powers. Um, Now, the Brood are a very intelligent race, but there is not one individual Brood creature that's actually intelligent on its own, minus the queen. The Brood work together as one central collective intelligence. That's basically how they operate. They work like ants. They work completely in perfect synchronization and in tandem with each other. Now, the way that they actually reproduce is that um, they basically they impregnate a host. Now, it has to be a host of a different species that they use to reproduce, whether it be a human or a metahuman or an alien creature of some kind, whatever. Now, the interesting thing about their reproduction is that whenever they actually reproduce, the embryos aren't actually born until they're actually inside of the host's body, inside of the host's cell structure, and then the Brood embryos start to take on the likeness of its host. However, one cool thing to note is that the Brood embryo is actually completely fully intelligent before it's even born. And because it's completely self-aware and it's intelligent, it can actually take over its host. And it can sort of control its host and make its host do things that the host would never be aware of. And when the Brood is born, it actually, say if its host was like a highly superpowered being, the Brood creature itself would inherit all the same powers and abilities that the host had. Like, say, if a Brood was born inside of a shape-shifting character, then that Brood would have the ability to shape-shift. And that Brood could look like whatever it wanted to. That I always thought that was really cool, and many of you may notice that the Brood are starting to sound very similar to, of course, the aliens from the Alien movie franchise, in which I could never really make a video about the Brood without pointing this out. Yes, Chris Claremont was very heavily inspired by the Alien from the original Alien movie to create the Brood. I felt I really needed to get that out there. So yeah, the Brood share more than a couple similarities with the aliens of the Alien franchise, but I think they're still pretty cool on their own. The Brood's actual history in the comics begins when during the Shi'ar story arc where Lilandra is actually crowned Empress of the Shi'ar Empire. Her sister, Deathbird, who is very, very jealous of Lilandra, seeks the aid of the Brood, and she wants to try to use the Brood to become the Empress of the Shi'ar Empire. So she captures all the X-Men pretty much. She captures Miss Marvel, and she also captures one of the Shi'ar Imperial Guard, Fang. All of the X-Men are completely unaware that they're being turned into Brood, all except for Wolverine, whose healing factor prevented him from being converted into a brood. And so whenever he wakes up, he helps all the other X-Men escape, with the exception of Fang, who's actually transformed into a brood creature. Now, the brood queen actually orders her army to relocate to the brood homeworld, and what they try to do is that they try to acquire a mystical energy called the Soul Force, which actually resides within the brain of the dead space whale called the Akanti. The X-Men arrive at the brood homeworld to try to stop the brood, but the X-Men unfortunately turn into broods themselves, and Wolverine tries to sort of mercy kill them, but Miss Marvel appears and saves the day, but she appears to be much more powerful, and she's turned into a completely different being due to the brood experimenting on her, because they didn't want to change her, but instead they wanted to experiment on her, seeing as how she's a half human, half Kree hybrid. So, with the power of the Soul Force and one prophesied Akanti creature, which was called a soul slinger, I believe, the Akanti manages to cure the X-Men of their brood infections, and the brood queen is transformed into a giant statue, and it appears that all is well. However, in the previous battle, the brood homeworld was actually destroyed, but there was still a pretty large collection of the brood that managed to land on Earth in the United States, where they would end up infecting a few mutants, but the X-Men were usually able to stop them, with the exception of one human woman named Hannah Conover, who was the wife of a reverend named William Conover, who had arthritis, and she was impregnated by a random woman who ended up becoming impregnated with a queen embryo in one of the previous scuffles mentioned that the X-Men had to stop. Hannah's impregnated with a queen embryo, but through strength of human will, I guess, she's able to resist becoming a brood, and so because of this, the brood empress was extremely pissed off about this. So the brood empress sent a number of brood assassins to Earth to kill her. However, the X-Men were able to stop that from happening, and the brood empress was eventually defeated when Iceman froze her into an ice statue, which completely cut off her telepathic connection to all of the other brood and all of her assassins and broodlings. And so after that, the brood didn't really have that much to do. There are a few comics that were set in the future where the X-Man known as Bishop has to pacify a few collections of brood in the future, but other than that, the brood haven't really been doing that much. Well, I mean, in the Planet Hulk storyline, in the events leading up to the Planet Hulk storyline, there were a lot of events involving the brood, but that's really all I care to mention. As far as my personal thoughts on the brood, I think that the brood are some of the most unusual villains within the Marvel Universe, as well as to be villains of the X-Men, but I really like them. I think that the brood are scary as hell. I think that they're basically like the aliens from the Alien movies, except with a strong sense of intelligence. They're unstoppable, hideous monsters that will just stop at nothing to take over every organic species in the universe and replace our DNA streams with theirs. And I think that's what makes them so creepy and intimidating. So, yeah, that's why I did a video on the Brood, and unfortunately, the Brood have really never been portrayed in any type of television or movies. So I really hope that maybe future X-Men movies will see the Brood, because I think they're really underrated and really scary and cool. But yeah, that's my Supervillains Explored on the Brood. You can probably expect to see more videos like this where I talk about a large collection of antagonists rather than just one. So yeah, that's my video. Hope you all enjoyed it. Goodbye.